We're going to run through a recap, Eldon and I, of the regular session of the General Assembly. We're not going to talk about the special session. Every bill that I'll be covering and talking about today is located in what we call our Key Bills document. It's available online, and when you access this seminar online, which I'm sure you all will, to come back and watch the videos again, Jonah is providing a link to the document for you, but it's in the handout as well. It's easily accessible. It's produced annually by AG Virginia each year, and it's more comprehensive than what we'll be covering. If you view it online, there's a link to each of the bills that's pretty user-friendly. We work closely with other organizations, such as VML and BACO, particularly on land use bills, and they both have very robust legislative programs. So I put a little plug-in for them. Also, their summaries are available online now also. And just in case you're interested, National APA has a site for policy on the national level. If you go to the site, you can find those things that I have listed there and more, pretty frequently updated, and let you know about things that are going on the national level. Today we're going to talk about the legislative process and what happened originally in the General Assembly. It's important to note that impacts the Code of Virginia, but there's also the administrative process, known as the Virginia Administrative Code. It's ongoing. It happens whether it's the short or long session of the Assembly. It's separate, and it's where you're going to find those very specific regulations. So VAC, which is commonly referred to as, is the Virginia Administrative Code. This year was a regular long session, and that is a 60-day session. And then in odd years, there's a short session of 45 days, which is what we'll have coming up. To give you an idea of a session summary, I stole this graphic from VPAP. If you don't know VPAP, you should. They're a fantastic nonprofit organization, and this is the second year they've sort of put together an infographic summary. And I'm kind of an infographic junkie, so. But since you can't read that, I did produce some blow-ups of top to bottom. This is graphically showing you that for each of the long sessions, which are the even number of years, we're seeing a decrease in the number of bills that are introduced. Of the bills that were introduced, this is kind of their fate, whether they were passed, killed, or continued. Of those that were passed, this talks about the margin of how they passed and what sort of opposition the bills faced. Of those that failed, this shows you how they failed overwhelmingly, and how subcommittee, you can see there in the graphic. And then, interestingly enough, we're seeing fewer bills continue into the next session. So maybe the General Assembly is getting more decisive over the years. Another quick housekeeping thing, Ellen and I are going to cover a lot of different bills that are going to impact each of your localities differently. You know, some of you are from cities or towns, a few of you may be from that urban executive form of government, and then there's going to be counties. So be sure that you are talking to your county attorney about any specifics. We're just going to sort of give you some very general information, just so that you'll have it in mind and can go back to your locality and ask more questions and see how that'll affect your ordinances or policies. The other important thing to remember is, as you're looking at some of these bills, you might be asking yourself, why do we need a bill for that? And just a reminder that we're a Dillon Rule state, and so localities have limited authority unless they're granted it from the General Assembly. So I included this wonderful bill as a great example of the Dillon Rule. This gives localities the authority to tell people they cannot park in front of mailboxes. So we're not going to have very many of these bills, but some of them will seem pretty minor in nature. And so just throwing out there that we do have to ask the state for permission on these bills, just to give you a heads up. So here's a quick overview. We're going to start with House Bill 193. This is a change in the FOIA section Basically, I think it was last year, might have been year before last, there was a provision put in the code so that you could meet electronically if you were having an issue, emergency or personal matter. Previously, your body had to do a vote and approve that person not being at the meeting. And the new requirement is to put in place a written policy. So for any of you who may utilize this is important to take back and talk to your commission or boards about whether you need to get this written policy in place. House Bill 1084 on constitutional permits. In my time working with lots of localities in the Commonwealth, I'm not familiar with all of you issuing a lot of things that are unconstitutional, but just in case you were, you need to stop now. And that's whether you have granted an approval or denied someone. And that includes the special exceptions, and there are many various things: special use permit, conditional use permit, rezoning, site plans, plans of development, subdivisions. If any of these are deemed unconstitutional, there can be compensatory damages awarded. So check out that bill if you're interested. It's important to note that that takes effect on decisions that happen on or after July 1, so it's not a retroactive bill. That's some language that we worked on closely with VACO to sort of tie it down as to what exactly these parameters would be. I skipped over this one. I've been looking for it. Posting of notices. This is something that impacts commissions, boards, BZAs, any of you. There was a modification that this could be allowed on your website. That's where you normally post your meeting information. It's another item that's great to talk to maybe your administration or attorney about how this might impact the way your meetings get posted. So House Bill 143, just something to make a note of. It can make your staff's life a lot easier instead of running around trying to get everything posted. But it also still, allows for either the old way and the new way, or even both, if you want to make sure you're covering all your bases. And this one I threw in because it got lots of media coverage. It's not particularly a land use planning issue, but under certain parameters, there will be hunting on Sundays in Virginia. For land use, the first item I'm starting with is actually not a bill, it was a resolution. It was a joint resolution that basically establishes this 11-member subcommittee. They're going to come up with some recommendations, both short-term and long-term, relative to recurrent flooding issues. And that report is going to be submitted to the Governor and the General Assembly by the 2016 session. House Bill 209 will touch a lot of you that do subdivision reviews. This is an interesting bill in that it states that you can no longer mandate that preliminary plats go before, the preliminary plats are required for subdivisions of 50 lots or less. I don't know how many of us are seeing subdivisions coming in with greater than 50 lots, particularly with the economy being the way that it is. But I think that we're going to still see a lot of developers who are interested in doing the preliminary plat, even though you can't mandate it locally. There's a lot of benefit to doing these, and any of us who work as staff know that you get the preliminary plat, and different localities treat them differently. I have heard people say that the requirements in some localities are very, very high, and it's almost the same as doing a development plan. Whereas in a lot of localities, more often than not, particularly where I work, it's basically one step above a napkin sketch. I mean, you basically need to put together what lot it is, where it's going to be located, where your road is going to be located, where you think you'll put stormwater. It's very conceptual. You get that approval, and then you're vested in the project. And the vesting has been very important with the economic downturn. All of you, I'm sure, are pretty familiar. The General Assembly passed a couple of bills to address the housing crisis and gave us those extensions first to 2014 and now to 2017. And those preliminary approvals that were valid back in January of 2009 are still sitting out there valid. If they hadn't received the preliminary approval on those concept plans, they very well could have lost any vesting in the project. So So I think that for several reasons, a lot of us would probably still see folks wanting to do the preliminary plan. But this basically says that localities can't require those. House Bill 377 relative to billboards, so this basically just addressed the construction of the sound walls. If those are going up and blocking the billboards, it gives them the opportunity to relocate the same way that it does if the property was taken via eminent domain. Or a new provision was added where you could pay rent to the Commissioner of Highways if your billboard remained in the same location and you don't happen to own the property. Don't know how many folks will take advantage of that option, but it was added. Okay, House Bill 527, group homes. Several years ago, the code was modified for group homes. A lot of you are going to be familiar with that. 8 adults living in the same home with mental illness, intellectual disabilities, have to be treated the same as regular single family. This year, the amendment that addressed staff was modified to strike the word counselor, and also added that it could be a resident or a non-resident of the structure. So just something to have in mind, and we'll see what, if any, impact that has. I think it was proposed for greater flexibility, and we'll see, what happens with that. Okay, House Bill 296. This slide is like a quiz. This was some of the original language that was proposed when the bill came in, and this is in section 2223. And those of us who are planners and planning commissioners are pretty familiar with this section. This talks about what's required to be in your comp plan. The language in italics is what was originally proposed, and I don't know if you notice it right off, but there's definitely something that's a little bit out of sorts. It says the locality shall take steps to align transportation infrastructure and facilities with affordable, accessible housing. Your comp plan doesn't have prescriptive language like that. It has a vision, it has language that would enable codes, it has language that would enable taking these steps, but comp plan language is not prescriptive in nature. So this was something that we went to the patron right away and said, we support this concept and we think it's great, but you're going to need a tweak in language if you're going to get our support and wider support from localities. So the new language says the locality shall take into consideration, and I think that is more appropriate for comprehensive plan language, and I think that you guys probably appreciate the shall take into consideration versus shall take steps, because it sometimes just sometimes we need to remind them that they're writing about comp plans and not zoning ordinances. Okay, next, this group of classifications Eldon is going to cover. It's all of the ag-related bills from this year. We actually had quite a few, and Eldon is going to hit some highlights for you.
Thanks, Emily. And Mike, thanks for that great introduction. And let's see, we've known each other long enough that one of our experiences were we were dueling expert planning witnesses in lawsuit. That was fun. No, the lawyers that I was working with were the ones that won, not me.
But I'm undefeated in the Supreme Court.
Never been there, don't care to, so thank you. Yes, I leave that to Mike. Let's see. First bill, House Bill 268, which was a carryover from the previous year, where the concept of providing the ag community greater flexibility in activities that they can carry out on their farms. The legislation the previous year was a little over the top. It was ultimately defeated, but efforts went on throughout the year to try to bring all the disagreeing parties together to come to some compromise. I will not tell you that this was a compromise bill. This was a bill that, from the point of view of local government and planners, we didn't particularly like it when it was introduced. It was clearly better and more workable than what was introduced the year before. I think people were doing a much better job of trying to work together to find a compromise in this last session than they did in the year before. It's always more productive when we talk about the issues and we don't accuse people of things. And when you get past that accusing and you start focusing on the issues, you usually can come to compromise and make progress. Here again, there were some parts of this bill that we're still uncomfortable with. There are some things that you're going to have to be paying attention to going forward. There's some things that you're going to have to define locally, which always makes us feel a little uncomfortable, because when we define locally, every jurisdiction, every planning commission, every board of supervisors, city council, town council, every attorney that represents sees it a little differently. And that's a good thing, because keeping planning and zoning at the local level closer to where the issues are makes good sense. Of course, all the power to do that flows from the General Assembly. So they can grant and they can take away, and they can expand. And the expansion for one is the limitation for another. And so that balancing act is something we all have to remember in that process. One person's property right to do something on the land also can infringe on the neighbor's property right to their quiet use and enjoyment of their property. And the point of planning and zoning is to try to strike that balance for everybody. And that's what your job is as planning commissioners, BZA members, planning staff there. Let me read to you from the bill itself. And Emily's done a good job of highlighting it. And we can hit on some of the language that I think it's important for you to be aware of. No locality shall regulate the carrying out of any of the following activities at an agricultural operation as defined in 3.2300. So ag operation, and you're referring from 15.2 back to the agricultural section of the code 3.2. Always good when you can tie definitions together. I think that's a good concept, but what is an ag operation as defined in the ag section of the code? Let me read that to you. Ag operation means the production of crops or animals or fowl, including production of fruits and vegetables of all kinds, meat, dairy, and poultry, nuts, tobacco, nursery and floral, production and harvesting of products from silviculture. Okay, so any ag operation, defined that way, can carry out the following activities unless, without any much local regulation, unless there's a substantial impact on the health, safety, and general welfare of the public. So your first challenge is to locally define what is substantial. And if you define that, create a threshold, whether that be scale, and I think that's usually the thing that because it drives so much traffic or so much public activity that you want to be sure the bathrooms, those types of questions, health, safety, welfare questions, you can say, all right, if it's over this threshold, that constitutes, in our opinion, substantial, so we're going to require some extra hoops. Okay? But anything under that threshold, we're not. And we all know that as we have those different definitions of what substantial is, in some places that's going to get tested, and then we will start to develop case law and start to define through the courts what substantial means. That will take a long time. It's just the way it goes. Okay, so what are those things that no locality shall regulate the carrying out of any of the following activities? Agritourism as defined in 3.26400. All right, you need to look real carefully at that section of the code. That's a very broad definition of agritourism. And why is that? That's an indemnity statute. It's to indemnify the farm operator from liability if they open their farm up for agritourism activities, so as to promote that. That was a good thing, okay? But by taking an indemnity statute, which is intentionally very broad to protect that landowner from frivolous lawsuits, and try to use that in a zoning context, it makes it challenging because we try to be more specific in a zoning context in order that it's clear to everybody what the rules are and what's governing and who's covered and who's not, okay? I'm just saying it's challenging because it's been done that way. That was one of the things we were uncomfortable with. Didn't get much traction from our side because it was a definition that was already in the code. And so that gives some comfort. So on the one hand, that's a good thing. On the other hand, there wasn't a whole lot of focus on the context of that definition. Okay, I'll move on. The sale of agricultural and silvicultural products, or the sale of agricultural-related or silvicultural-related items incidental to agricultural operation. Another thing that you're going to have to wrestle with. How broad is incidental? Caps, what are they? Caps, bottle openers, T-shirts on bottle openers. That's the other bit. That's the fun. I'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to bottle openers in a minute. But you're going to wrestle with that. What is incidental? Now, you're starting to see some things here that may look a little familiar. We're picking up language from the farm wineries legislation, which was a battle that was fought over a number of years to come to the statute that exists. Local government was never fully comfortable with that statute, but the final outcome was far better than where it started. There was a lot of good, healthy negotiation, a lot of good disagreement, but we listened to each other and came to something that it has its issues, for some localities more than others, but it's workable. And I'll use those terms loosely. More workable for some localities than it is for others, but on a broad scale. And so the General Assembly sees that as workable, so it's, oh great, that worked over here, so why can't it work over here? The preparation, processing, and sale of food products in compliance with subdivisions A, 3, 4, and 5 of 3.2, 5130, or related state laws and jurisdictions. Now, what is that? Okay, that's actually a very good definition. 3.2, 5130. Point A is the inspections statute for food processing, food sales facilities. It's the health department where they go in and do the inspections. If we look at the 6 items in that section, 1, which isn't included here, all right, we only include 3, 4, and 5. 1 is your manufacturing plants, where your big meat processing those. They're not, can't do that. 2 is your nonprofits that are just doing a one-day food sale, so that's not covered. All right, what is allowed? Private house that's selling candies, jams, jellies, and so forth. Okay, so that home production. And think of this in terms of scale. All right, the big scale is out. The small home farm size is supposed to be in. And I would, when you're defining substantial, I think it's worth thinking about how that's used, what's in and what's out in this part of the legislation. 4 is private homes for pickles and so on and so forth. And 5 is private homes for honey and so on and so forth. Been cut off. And then 6, which isn't included, is your retail. That's your 7-Elevens. So the bill written was all more encompassing. And so as we work through the definition, this really came to helping you with the whole scale issue, which is one of the concerns that we've had from the beginning with this. What we were fearful of is somebody's going to do something that we would normally have a special exception for that's going to have a large number of people in a short period of time on a small gravel road. And you got traffic problems, and then what if somebody gets hurt? Can you get the ambulance in there? Can you get the fire truck in? Or you got to deal with the public health issues. And by doing these scale things, that helps create some comfort from a public safety, from a public health, and an impact on the next door neighbors and the other people in that lane. Of course, that's your balancing act that you have to try to do, is balance all those rates. Okay, what else? Now, other activities or events that are usual and customary at Virginia agricultural operations. You're going to be in the process of figuring it out for your community. Yeah. And again, let's talk about that scale thing. If you've got a large-scale operation where you're having people every weekend coming into events, and they're coming into a farm building, that farm building is exempt from what? Building code. So you haven't had inspections yet, you're trooping a lot of the public. And what happens, God forbid, if somebody gets hurt in that situation because the building was really not proper for large numbers of the general public? Okay, a great working building for farm activities where your family and the people that work for the farm are in and out working, fine. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about large numbers of the public, and your job is to provide some level of protection. That's one of the things you're going to have to wrestle with, is where is that balance? Because this bill is about promoting greater diversity of economic activity in those farms, and that's a good thing. Okay? Don't mistake. Local government's opposition to this was not about that at all. It was about keeping people safe and protecting the neighbors, the other people on the lane, what have you. Any local restrictions placed on an activity listed in this bill shall be reasonable and take into account the economic impact of the restrictions. So it's embedded right in there. You've got to be thinking about that economic impact as you determine any restrictions you put in place. But what is reasonable? So more defining. Again, look to the farm wineries legislation, because that's very similar language. Then, no locality shall require a special exception, administrative permit, not required by state law. That was not in the original bill, but that was added in. Why is that important? Because the state requires local government to issue E&S permits. And without that phrase, somebody could say, well, I don't even have to do an E&S permit. You want to fight over the Chesapeake Bay stuff? And so that protection was written in. So those state required permits, if you opted in to run stormwater, your issuance of the state required stormwater permit is still covered. If you didn't opt in, we'll talk about that in a minute, then DEQ will be handling that. Or special use permit or any activity listed above on the property that is zoned as an agricultural district or classification unless there is a substantial impact on health, safety, and general welfare. There you go, that's that definition. The next part of the bill deals with sound, noise, music, loud music, what have you. That's right out of the farm wineries legislation. And that's something that pretty much everybody over the years is real comfortable with. We didn't have, from a local government perspective, any objection to that section. It's something we've been living with and dealing with and writing local ordinances to try to manage. As you know, trying to deal with noise is a challenge anyway. And how do you write that in a way that provides the protections and then can withstand challenge? It's a needle to thread. The final section, the provisions of this section shall not affect any entity licensed in accordance with Chapter 2 of Title 4.1. That's your ABC laws. So if it's licensed, any kind of ABC license, this section doesn't apply to it. Also, it doesn't apply to nothing is to alter the provisions of 15.2, 2288.3, that's farm license. Okay, it doesn't apply to farm wineries, this section. You've got your deal under the farm wineries statute and the local regulations there. You can't come back and say, oh, wait a minute, no, I want to go by these. You're that, you can't be this too. Or to restrict the authority of any locality under 58.1. Now that's your tax code. Because up there, your locality couldn't issue any, couldn't require any administrative permit. Okay. Well, would that be the B-poll? Well, B-poll's off the table because authority under 58.1. So what was done in that last section was to try to corral this so that you just didn't have a free-for-all of things that really weren't the intent of this legislation. At least I didn't believe it was the intent of the proponents of the legislation. Okay, sorry that was so long, but that's one you're going to be wrestling with in how to define locally. How to help improve the economic viability of your ag operations. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But you've got to balance that with the impacts on the neighbors and the protection of the people that are coming and taking advantage of the agritourism activities. Okay. We did say hold the questions to the end. Let's move on to House Bill 1089. This too was a holdover from some fights previous years where legislation was introduced to bring agriculture under the Right to Farm Act. And there was AG's opinion saying that no, that bill did not pass. Pretty ugly fight. It was introduced late. It wasn't something that in that particular session, it wasn't something that was worked on ahead of time, so it just caught everybody off guard. It drew out one particular little fight. I won't go there. The APA Virginia, after that happened, engaged the Virginia Seafood Council. And we met with the Virginia Seafood Council and the Aquaculture Association. It was just actually forming at that point. And Emily, George Homewood, the current president of APA Virginia, and myself, and several leaders of those organizations, we sat down several times because we figured this was coming back in some form. Let's try to see if we can come to some compromise, some understanding, something that worked for everybody, and we really never could. We had great discussions, established some good trust and working relationships. We didn't get in a big fight with them over this. They actually weren't the proponents of this. It again was pulled over from that local fight. And basically now, agriculture is part of the definition of agriculture as far as 15.2 is concerned. Previously, it was not. It is in the definition of agriculture, as you see here in 3.2 6400, but it wasn't in any of the definitions in 15.2, of which there were two. So we'll move on from there. Senate Bill 5. Folks, this is no big deal. Of course, when we see anything that's right to farm introduced, you always want, oh my gosh, because people remember the fight from 20 years ago to get that into the code in a way that everybody could live with. And that was such a tumultuous fight that nobody really wants to open it. Local government doesn't want to open that section of code up. Farm Bureau and agribusiness doesn't really want to open that section of code up because if you open it up, it can become a free-for-all. And somebody can end up worse off than where they are. There's a balance now that people have grown accustomed to. But in 2007, there was some clarifying legislation to make sure that it applied to all localities. not just counties. Right? And that was a change that nobody had any real heartburn with. They're not, this doesn't affect the city of Alexandria, even though it applies to them. They don't have an ag limit. But it does affect a couple of big cities, especially in Tidewater. Well, in 2008, the General Assembly did something that they do from time to time. They redo the whole code for a section. And the Ag Code, which was prior to 2008, 3.1, so on and so forth, was redone and renamed 3.2. If you remember, a decade or so ago, we did that with 15.1, and we now have 15.2. The Code Commission leads that effort, and it's a real process of just trying to clean it up, not try to sneak anything in. So it's intended to be a clean process. But what invariably happens is after you've done that, you find, oops, we left something out that was supposed to be in there. And what happened in 2008 is localities that had been defined in 2007, it wasn't picked up and carried forward to 3.2. It was returned back to counties, and nobody caught it until this year. So that's all this was. This is just no big deal. But again, you see right at the farm, and everybody stands up and says, okay, wait, who's up to something? What? Okay. Let's talk about farm breweries. You know, farm wineries have been so much fun, so we'll now have farm breweries, SB 430. This is another one we didn't know was coming. And after we talk about this one, I'm going to ask you a question relative to that. We didn't know this was coming. How are we on time? Okay. This bill was, the proponents of this bill were the Virginia Manufacturing Association. What? That's kind of what what I didn't realize was that the Beer Crafters Guild is part of the Manufacturing Association. I had no idea. So they were the chief lobbyists and proponents behind this. And this is about, hey, craft beer, it's a growing industry, kind of the way wineries were a number of years ago. It's becoming real popular. This was an effort to try to follow the model of the farm wineries' success and create legislation to promote that same kind of success for farm breweries. So you're going to have to be dealing with this in your local codes in one manner or form. Now, one of the things we do when we're dealing with the General Assembly and dealing with bills that, let's say, aren't real happy with, we'd like to make better, or maybe we'd like to go away, is we talk about how big the bill is. Well, the original bill for this, 430, was 23 pages long. It's a pretty substantial piece of legislation. But it was because it affected so many different sections of the code. So the measure of the bill that we were caught off guard, we didn't know it was coming, made us feel real uncomfortable at first because of somehow how broad it was and the kinds of impact it might have. The same thing, impacting neighbors and the worry about protecting the public. So we wanted to improve the bill. Again, the concept, promoting that economic growth, that's fine. But let's do it in a way that's rational and safe. So one of our measures is when you take a bill that's 23 pages long and did you make it skinnier? We did. We got it down to just over 2 pages. So if that's a measure of success, we did that. Okay. This creates a whole new license under the ABC law of limited brewery to be on a farm. And limited means no more than 15,000 barrels of beer per year. Well, hey, when General Assembly's in session, we like beer. It's just part of our life. But that's over in the ABC section, but you have a whole new section now in 15.2, 15.2-2288.3:1. Limited brewery license, local regulations of certain activities. And basically this just it picks up an awful lot of what was done for farm wineries and puts it into the code for Lauderdale farm breweries. I would imagine you're going to be working on some ordinance changes relative to accommodate this. I'm not going to go into any more detail on that. Just if you can, if you've got questions, you can ask them. I want to get on to other things. Those are your, I've talked about two important economic development opportunities for the ag community. I don't know about you, but I know in most communities I've worked with that have agriculture, we want agriculture to succeed and to prosper. Cows do not go to school. And that's real good for your local tax rate. Let's switch over and talk about, oh, I know, I was going to ask you a question. All right. We've got expanded agricultural operation, home-produced stuff. We've got, you know, the whole farm wineries thing over a couple of years ago. We now have farm breweries. What's next?
Distilleries.
That's a good guess. Because I don't know the answer to that. And that's what we're asking. Okay, what do we need to be prepared for? Distilleries. Let's go. Who's got another one? Come on, help us out.
Marijuana.
More farmers stay on farm.
Wait, marijuana?
Colorado.
Actually, you know, okay. I'm going to get, what was the comment in the back? I didn't hear you.
I said more farmers being able to stay on the farm.
Well, but I think that's what this legislation was intended to do, these pieces of legislation. And I think, I don't know any local officials that I've ever worked with that would ever, I don't know any, there may be some that would disagree with that. How we get there is with what is fair for debate and discussion. Right?
Well, President LeMay, what's the average age of the Virginia farmer? Any idea? 68 years old. 63. Sitting out with an adjustment based on the more recent census, we probably are closer to the lower 60s than we were with 58. 58's been the noted average age for a better part of a decade, so I would concur that we're probably in the area of 61 to 63 years of age. Now, the economy has run a curve to a lot of folks, but traditional retirement is anywhere from 60 and above. Succession is a huge issue. Who will be the farmer of tomorrow? As Eldon points out, a lot of the legislation of recent vintage is designed to bring about greater economic viability and a way forward relative to how we keep farming and agricultural enterprise viable. But Eldon's point is very real. We all need to think about what is down the road when we think about agriculture and we think about value-added agriculture. Distilleries, that could very well be part of the evolving picture in the next few years. Other things that might generally, either directly or incidentally or tangentially related to agriculture, I think is where Eldon's going. And it's now something that's common increasingly to cities and towns, something called urban agriculture. All across the country, people are discovering, hey, I can, bring in some good dirt and 4 by 6 across my backyard and go at it. Chesterfield County, where I live, we got chickens. Okay? So it's something that's common or becoming more so. So you need to begin thinking, as Eldon is prompting you to do, what's out there and likely to be out there.
And I'm going to take that one step farther. For those of you who are in a position to encourage your governing body to establish a working group that's focused on what is the future of ag and ag-related activities in our community and how can we do the right things for everybody, for the whole community, and to focus in on that. I would encourage that. Because you're going to be writing local statutes, local ordinances that are going to try to define what are some of the limitations, these things like substantial and that sort of thing. Get that group to advise you, to help you with determining what is the scale that's too big that we need to have some public safety or public health concerns. And what are the things that are under that they're fine, do it, get them out here, make them happen. So utilize your expertise in your community, so I encourage you to do that.
Yeah, what's next? What about recycling centers? You can add.
Good question.
As in like recycling of spent grains, recycling, or do you mean?
Concrete.
What we talking about?
I put that on your discussion. How do we respond to that? I think it's going to be different in different parts of the state, and it should be. I mean, for what Smith County would do with that versus what Fairfax could be very different. Yes.
I didn't hear his question. Please repeat.
He said recycling, and it was really more construction debris recycling is what we're talking about. I'm going to do, I don't want to get too many questions here, but I did tease you, and I'm only going to do so much. I'm going to go here, here, and then back here. So, ladies first. Ladies first.
In your discussion with the Farm Bureau, has there been a discussion in what we hear, and I hate to use this term, but anyway, more the true farmer are concerned about the great to be bringing people in, but if I'm irrigating, if I'm spreading manure, if I'm doing what traditional farming is what we're seeing a lot of discussion about the inability for traditional farming to continue.
And I think, I'm just going to direct before Ellen answers, that's something that's always been on our mind. I grew up on a farm, and farming isn't always pretty. I mean, seriously, it smells bad, it's loud, it's not always good to look at. So it's something to really be, thinking about when we're talking.
Legislation.
Kind of like making legislation. It's something to think about because some of these uses we're talking about are boutique and they're kind of cute and it's, and we're all for it and local food movements and backyard chickens, it's great. But when you talk about agriculture, you have to talk about the real agriculture too. It's a scale issue and it's almost a classification. So I totally get what you're saying. It's something that we have been interjecting into our conversations.
And there is called for in the ag bill that I first talked about, the continuation of a working group at the state level to continue some of those discussions. Okay. Frank.
We talked about agriculture as an economic thing, and we operate, this is all pursuant to police power, and we're concerned about impacts on health, safety, and welfare. But oyster farming was started as a means to bring balance to the Chesapeake Bay. The ability to denitrify the water, to sequester phosphorus, sequester carbon, decrease turbidity, increase SAP. I'm not promoting one side or the other, but it was done for that. And even if we are, with our stormwater and everything else, even if we can bring to zero emission into the Chesapeake Bay, it'll still take 100 years to possibly reach nutrient balance in the bay. And I know because I started one of the first oyster fisheries, and I did it because of the environment in the Chesapeake Bay. It should be, when you are considering a zoning issue, I think you should also consider an offset for environmental benefit or other mitigated elements.
We're going to talk about the stormwater bill in a few minutes, and good points, all of those very good points, Joan.
I'd wonder if we need to add to your list maybe the auxiliary use of energy and energy development, both on energy efficiency on farm, but also the development of energy products on farm, so that we can, it might be a natural intersection between those two elements.
I think that is something of the future, very much so, such as the use of biomass in energy and the use of biomass in nitrogen production and energy and aligning some of those things to get the strategic benefit of multiple purposes.
But they also, I was thinking about it in terms of the word incidental, because conservation stuff tends to be incidental to efficiency on farm, but could have implications due to air quality and you know, production of economic benefits as well.
Absolutely, okay. Transportation, and then we'll come back to stormwater.
Ellen's just gonna sit down long enough to get his drink of water. He's gonna be back up in a second. Transportation is very short this year. Any of you who were here last year, we did the recap, you know, that was the sweeping legislation, and we had lots to cover. This year, all of my transportation bills fit on one slide, and they're pretty, House Bill 2, you know, prioritization on funding for CTV projects. I think this, some of you, particularly in the metropolitan areas, are already seeing this as your projects are going on to lists and onto, you know, getting into plans. We're seeing it already on how we can get those prioritized. And some of us were doing it already, and this makes it more comprehensive for the whole CTV Commonwealth Transportation Board. House Bill 904, it provides a hearing notice on VDOT projects. If it's greater than $100 million project, they need to notify the adjacent property owners. And I think that's a good bill. House Bill 975, that is the modification to last year's legislation repealing the hybrid tax. That was included in that bill. And Senate Bill 97, just an interesting bill, increases the passing distance from 2 feet to 3 feet when you're passing a bicycle, also a moped, animal, or an animal-drawn vehicle. So in case you were only doing 2 feet, now you need to do 3 feet. I made a joke a second ago about Eldon. He's covering ag and stormwater today, and he will be up here just now covering stormwater. He really can tell you the story of the last decade of what's gone on in stormwater, how we got to where we are. He's not going to, but he could. He was very active with this legislation. He's going to talk to you a little bit about everyone coming together and how this sort of came to be in the existence of what is now 1173, but was multiple bills when the session started. And I'm not going to say anything else. I don't want to spoil the fun.
Sometimes things work better than others. And the outcome on this really was an indicator of a lot of people with very different points of view coming together and trying to create the best for all. We're going to still find that there are problems. Because we're moving, you know, implementation is weeks away for the new stormwater regime. I mean, it really has been a decade. In 2004, the General Assembly picked up stormwater management for, you know, that impacts localities and took it away from DEQ and gave it to DCR, because DCR was, you know, more the resource conservation agency, you know, let's face it, one division is state parks and another is soil and water. And took it away from the mean old super regulator DEQ. In 2013, when some legislators came to the conclusion from the encouraging of many of their constituents that DCR, which had historically been a technical assistance agency, had to do a real turnaround in 2014 and start becoming a regulatory agency. And that just wasn't their shtick. And it just never worked for them. You know, there can be some people who would disagree with what I just said, but the opinion of the legislature when we got to 2013 was that didn't work, we're giving it back to DEQ. So we went 10 years, we went full circle. And I was in a conversation with the county administrator in one of the counties that I work with 2 days ago. And at the end of the conversation, he said, gosh, you're right. I never would have thought that I would say I'm glad to have DEQ running the program. But they are a regulatory agency, and they understand that world. And we can disagree with some of the way they do things, but they work very hard to try to be equitable to everybody who's being governed by the regulations. All right, that's my commentary on DEQ. There were about 15 bills on stormwater that were introduced because the legislature was hearing from their constituents all over the state about the localities having to stand up this program by July 1. It was like, you know, we got problems. We just can't make this happen, and there's some detail problems. The major proposals were consolidated into two bills, SB 423 and HB 1173. 423 was Senator Amy Hanger, 1173 was Delegate Keith Hodges, both of whom are members of something called the Rappahannock River Basin Commission. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Senator Hanger is also a senior member of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, so he brings a lot of working knowledge to these issues, and is a premier legislator on water resource issues. Keith Hodges is a relatively young legislator, but he took Harvey Morgan's seat. Harvey Morgan had that status in the House, premier water quality, water resource legislator, and Keith Hodges recognized that's really important to his district, and that's the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck. Water is it. Farming, forestry, and fishing is that district. The bill has an emergency clause on it, which means that as soon as it was signed by the governor to effect, the first of the two bills to be signed was Senate Bill 423, and that was signed on March 24th. So on March 24th, these things took effect that I'm going to talk about. And the reason that was so important was its major impact on local government, as local governments were all being required to stand up the program. And how did we end up? July 1, 2014, the requirements for local program implementation, all right, and I'm going to refer to the acronym VSMP, Virginia Stormwater Management Program. So when I say VSMP, and I'm also going to use the term VSMP authority. Within the law, within the regulations, if a local government is going to run the VSMP program, they are the VSMP authority in their jurisdiction. If a local government chooses to let DEQ run the program, then DEQ is the VSMP authority in that jurisdiction. Okay? Important points. Okay. All MS4, anybody has an MS4 permit? Anybody know what an MS4 permit is? Okay. If you're a big city, you're a small city. If you're a big county, you have an urbanized area defined by the census. You've gone through a process with EPA, and they've defined you as you have to have an MS4 municipal stormwater, I don't know, a bunch of S's permit. And it operates like a permit that you have for a wastewater treatment plant, you know, where you have a pipe and the stuff comes out the pipe. Well, you don't in stormwater until you catch it and run it down a conveyance. But this is a permit that, looking at Jeff Harvey, Stafford County has with DEQ and ultimately EPA that says that they will do certain things to manage stormwater. Sorry, so if you're governed by that, you're an urban area, you have to have a locally run. The locality has to be the VSMP authority. All right. If you're non-MS4, however, which this is a big change, you could decide whether you want to be the VSMP authority or not. And if you aren't, it's DEQ. And so DEQ will receive the filings for stormwater management plans for a development, let's say. They will review them, they will approve them, they will issue the permit to the developer in that case, and they will do the inspections and blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, that all rests with the local government with an ordinance that will be, have you all adopted your ordinance yet? In Stafford? Get close, okay. Yeah, so, and that's the track. It should be right about now. You said you have, where you, Franklin?
Franklin County.
Okay. Franklin's an MS4?
No.
Okay, you have opted in.
Yeah.
Okay, that gets to the next point. If you're not an MS4 locality, you can choose to run the program yourself and tell DEQ you're opting in. It's interesting, the statute was, the bill was written to give local governments the authority to choose to opt into the program. So, yeah, we want to do it, not this, yeah, we don't want to do it. not opt out. Interesting, but usually it's done opt out way. Okay. I don't know if there's any real significance other than the way DEQ has to ask you the question. Why would a local government want to be the DSMP authority if they don't have to? And I think that the reason comes down, there are several reasons, but primarily it comes down to a concern for customer service. One stop to get the permit, because you still have local permits for any kind of development activity. But if you're not the DSMP authority, it's going to be DEQ. But it's a massive program to set up. And that scale of standing up a new program is why there was so much pushback and why part of the reason the legislation was passed. Okay, one of the good things this bill does is it allows for an agreement in lieu of a stormwater management plan for the construction of a single-family residence. And this came from the counties in the Upper Rappahannock Basin. It came from other places as well, but it was really raised to the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, which is made up of local elected officials and members of the General Assembly, by the elected officials and the administrators in Culpeper and Rappahannock and Madison and those areas. And it was, wait a minute, if we've got somebody who's got 10 acres and they're going to build a house, the fact that they have a long driveway in is going to throw them over the threshold, and they're going to have to spend $8,000, $9,000 on an engineered plan that gets submitted. Now, if that 10 acres, the driveway's along the ridge top, and everything downhill to the property line is wooded, 1,000 feet of woods, what in the world? There ain't going to be any stormwater runoff. Now, you got to put the ENS up during construction. I'm talking about post-construction, because the stormwater management plan governs forever. So it was, wait a minute, why should we have this? Now, what they wanted was if the locals were going to be running the program, the local government could allow some kind of agreement in lieu of, like you're allowed to do with the ENS plan. You know, follow that same model. It's worked for 20 years. That way, 10 years. Why not the same thing? Now, you could have that 10 acres and the driveway goes down and crosses the stream so that you would want to require a stormwater management plan. But it was that permissiveness. So that's added to the bill. It also directs DEQ to establish procedures for not requiring registration under construction general permit for that single-family home that is being built outside of a subdivision. Okay, so that small impact, that streamlines some of the regulatory requirements. If it's a part of a subdivision, no, it's got to go through all the hoops because that's a bigger impact. Uh-oh. I'm being cut off. DEQ is, it also clarifies that any appeal in a locally run program is handled through the local informal appeal process that has been allowed for years in ENS, and not a formal appeals process that really is a state process, that I think was mistakenly put in the statute when the statute was written to have localities run the program. That would have been very burdensome on local government if that was not taken out. And DEQ, if we ever get a budget passed, there's budget language that will require DEQ to go back and really re-examine the fees and the rates. Okay, since we're, okay, you guys could do 2 days of session on stormwater management, and I try to do that in just 10, 15 minutes. Questions that you have for Emily? Yes.
And I think what we want to do is the microphones that are in the walk area, feel free to approach the microphone and speak into the microphone, and I think we need to click it on before you do so. Should be a little switch.
In the amendments to the stormwater code, another one line was inserted saying that basically DEQ will enforce state permits. It's a new edit to the code. And I wondered what your interpretation of that was.
I'm not 100% sure. That was in the negotiation. That was part of the compromise to get. The bill does a lot of different things. I just hit some of the highlights. And a lot of things that make it much easier for local government to run the program, and it streamlines some impacts on the individuals and homeowners if they're trying to do small projects. I'm not sure exactly what that means. That was something that we had to get with.
Yeah, I raised that because there is a move afoot for DEQ to pass all previous projects to the localities. Because as you said, these projects have to be inspected and enforced in perpetuity. And so DEQ wants to hand over all old permits to localities to then inspect forever. And there's a definition in the code. This is a state permit, is something that's issued by the state. And so if it was issued by the state and DEQ records the state permits, then they should not be allowed to pass these old projects on to localities, which would basically a large burden.
Patrick is advancing a very important point, but it is also instructive that we remember that when we think about the role of the legislature and the power and authority of the Commonwealth, they're the ones who empower local governments with their responsibilities, and on occasion, the state will defer or pass to its local governments some authority that we sometimes might view as clearly in their bailiwick, if you will. But I think you're advancing a construct of the law that is maybe, as Sullivan suggests, still a little gray in terms of can you, should you, as a local government, be viewed as the on-ground accountability component for what ostensibly is a statewide function.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add to what Mike said is we should never look at any piece of legislation and say, oh, we're done with that. Because we're never done. We're never done. So sorry I didn't help you much with that question.
That's a very good question, though.
It's to be determined. And we will probably have clarifying language as we start determining and somebody gets uncomfortable with the determination. Yes, sir.
Mr. James, Sammy Smith from Buckingham. Let's just, hypothetical situation. I buy 100 acres of timberland. I'm zoned Ag 1. It's right next to my existing beef farm. Am I exempt when I clear the timber and turn it back into pastures?
When you go to file with your notified the Department of Forestry that you're going to timber, you've got to answer their questions. And if they're okay, I'm okay. They're the determiner on that. And what they're looking for is, what they're most concerned about is if your ultimate plan is really to build a 100-lot subdivision and you're just trying to get around the E&S and the bond rules and those sort of things. And so they're going to come out and they're going to ask you, you tell them honestly, I don't, they're going to make that determination. They're going to look at the activity. Is that skid row the width of this little table, or is it 2 cars wide and cramped? We better be in touch with the local government about the planning and zoning issues. I don't know if that answers your Department of Forestry. That's who you need to be talking to. Yes.
Any questions? Mark?
This is sort of a continuing with the ag usage. I think it's always been this way, although it's not probably traditionally been enforced. The traditional farming activity is not regulated by stormwater regulations. The barns and those other items that you're doing on those farms are correct. The barn itself is not exempt.
The agricultural operations, that you're dealing with the Soil and Water Conservation District and DCR, Soil and Water Board, not with local government. But stormwater impact from the impervious surface of, I would say it still applies, but that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
They got to say folks to be aware, and there'll be some weird overlap when you get into those agritourism, winery, brewery stuff.
I'm going to ask that question of some folks at DEQ and see what they tell me. Okay, I'll Harbor Basin Commission members and get them to ask the question.
Other questions for Eldon or questions for Emily?
Questions for Mike?
Or questions for Mike?
Thank you.
If not, thank you very much, Eldon and Emily, for the excellent overview and comment relative to the legislation of consequence for this particular legislative.